welcome back! Today I'll be explaining how you can create the perfect alter ego using your MBTI type. This is something that I use as a part of shadow work, which is all about integrating your shadow or the repressed parts of your personality, which will show up as inferiorities or self-sabotage. And the goal of shadow work is to develop these weaker parts of yourself in order to reach your fullest potential. If shadow work is new to you, I have a whole video explaining what it is and how to do it. I'll link it up here for you to check out. But today I'm going to be sharing one of my favorite shadow work practices, which is creating an alter ego for yourself. So in this video, I'll be explaining why having an alter ego actually works, how you can create one using your MBTI type, and what all this actually looks like in practice. So first things first, what is an alter ego? In psychology, an alter ego is defined as an individual's alternate personality or persona, another self. There are two terms in here I want to explain a bit more from a Jungian perspective, and that's the ego and persona. So to keep it simple, Jung describes three major players in the psyche, and this is your persona, your ego, and your shadow. Your persona is part of the conscious mind. You can think of it as the person you want to be. It's your social mask and the image that you project outwards. Your shadow is part of the unconscious mind, and it's the opposite of this. Jung describes the shadow as the thing a person has no wish to be, and it contains all the parts of your personality you've learned to repress and reject. And your ego is like the mediator between these two. Your ego is part of the conscious mind, and it listens to both of these impulses, and it acts as the final judge. So your ego is what determines all your actions and reactions in life, but it's a result of this balancing act between your persona and your shadow. When doing this, your ego develops a certain thinking style. Jung calls this your conscious attitude. And this develops as your tendencies of how you interact with the world around you. Your conscious attitude is made up of pairs of psychological functions, and you'll definitely recognize these. The first pair is introversion or extroversion, the second is thinking and feeling, and the third is sensation and intuition. Each of these exists like a spectrum. There are no pure psychological types, but you tend to fall somewhere on that spectrum. If this sounds familiar, it's because this is what the MBTI types were later based on. So, your conscious attitude, which acts as this filter for your ego when making decisions, orients itself on your persona. Remember, this is the image of who you want to be. It's the part of your identity that you consciously shape to fit the expectations and roles and norms of society. And your conscious attitude also plays a crucial role in selecting and developing this persona of yours. Your conscious attitude also helps you adapt your persona to different situations. For example, you may change the image that you project at home or at work or with your friends, depending on what your conscious attitude thinks is best to meet these expectations. So, both your conscious attitude and persona have a great deal of influence over one another. And this is where it gets interesting. Because you can internalize certain aspects of your persona, the image that you're orienting yourself by, this can reshape your conscious attitude and influence it. And this is why the classic fake it till you make it works so well. Let's say you want to be more confident, so you consistently pretend to be confident in social situations as part of your persona. And over time, this will influence your conscious attitude, how you view yourself and how you approach situations, and you really will become more confident as a person. And this is also why an alter ego, adopting a different persona, works and is such a powerful tool for shadow work. It's because of this complementary relationship between the persona and the conscious attitude. Your conscious attitude orients itself on your persona, and your persona is shaped by the actions of your ego. And the trick is, you can be intentional about the persona you adopt. But here's the thing, because these functions of your conscious attitude exist on a spectrum, it has the tendency to become more and more focused and specialized over time, which can become very one-sided. You prioritize different psychological functions in your decision-making and problem-solving, but you become weaker in the other side of it. Understand, your ego's whole role is to take in information. It selects what's important, and it excludes the rest. So the relationship between the conscious and unconscious mind is complementary, and anything that's excluded by the conscious mind will fall into the unconscious, becoming part of your shadow. Whenever you become too one-sided in your conscious attitude, you'll start to have a lot of problems showing up on the other end of this, such as inferiorities, fears, and self-sabotaging behaviors. And the whole point of understanding this dynamic is so that you can develop your weaker functions so that you're no longer getting in your own way. You can become the person who is able to reach your fullest potential. And you can do this by analyzing your own conscious attitude. Jung created a great system for this, which the MBTI types are based on, and these are your psychological types. So I'll give you a quick overview of the different psychological types because even though you may know them from MBTI, they're often misunderstood. And try to also take a note of which resonate with you so that you can use this later on. The first pair is extroversion and introversion. I'll start with extroversion. Extroverts are more focused on the external world and other people. They also tend to be influenced by their environment, culture, and the opinions of others, so much so that if extroverts were born in a different culture, they would turn out to be entirely different people. But this is also what allows them to be more socially adaptable and flexible. Extroverts think and feel outside of themselves, and they see the world as something that they can animate. Many extroverts may also lack inner conviction, as there's no solid ground to sustain their views. They can very easily change their opinions when they're influenced by others. Introverts, on the other hand, have their attention directed to their inner world. While they're aware of the external situation, their ego and subjective opinions will have a greater value for them, and they're constantly filtering the world through a personal lens. They also seek to shield themselves from the outside world instead of being absorbed by it like extroverts. Because introverts tend to act from a firm set of rules, they can become very rigid and inflexible in an attempt to shield themselves from external influences. The next pair of functions are thinking and feeling. The thinking function is very logical and rational, and it explains concepts and ideas through a process of comparison with what you know. It also has the tendency to be very detached and cold and objective, and it gives everything equal value. The feeling function, however, determines value through a very subjective lens, depending on whether or not you like something or deem it acceptable or not. It focuses on the nuances of objects and tends to create relationships with things. It allows you to perceive the emotional value of things and to understand the feelings of yourself and others. And the final pair of functions is sensation and intuition. Sensation is focused on reality and the here and now. Think of your 5 senses. This is how you mostly perceive the world. It's very detail-oriented and focused on both internal and external stimuli. Intuition, on the other hand, is focused on the unconscious, and it has a very symbolic and metaphorical language. It's contrary to sensation because it's future-oriented and sees things for what they could be rather than what they are. Intuition recognizes the potential in things rather than focusing on small details. Think things like gut feelings or hunches or images that come to mind. These are all parts of your intuition. Here's an example of the different functions in conversation, so you can see how they're applied. A person with a thinking tendency will pay attention to what you're saying, the words you're using, the logic behind what you're saying, and if things make sense from a rational standpoint. A person with a feeling tendency will perceive the emotions and true intentions behind your words and pick up on the underlying mood of the conversation. A person guided by sensation will pay attention to your subtle gestures, your tone of voice, your appearance, and pull the information they need from these small details. Whereas a person guided by their intuition will immediately know by their gut feeling whether what you're saying is true and in good intentions or not. Now, everything that is conscious, we tend to have good control over, and everything that is unconscious tends to be poorly developed and it will take effort to integrate. So the opposite functions of your conscious attitude will be your blind spots. These are areas where you may struggle to pick up information, creating a backdoor for problems to slip into the unconscious, into your shadow. Jung calls this your inferior function. Now let's take a quick look at each type with its inferior function. And keep in mind, because this is the undeveloped part of your thinking style. This is where your shadow is most likely to form and where you will have problems show up in your life. These are the ways in which you tend to self-sabotage and have irrational fears or limiting beliefs. So, a thinking person with an inferior feeling function will have a very undeveloped relationship with their emotions. They may struggle to recognize their own emotions and understand the feelings of others. They may see things as very black and white and miss out on the emotional nuance of situations. And because of their inferior feeling function, they may also be very moody and immature in expressing their emotions or extremely harsh and cold. However, a feeling person with inferior thinking function will have a hard time seeing things from a detached and objective perspective. Because they judge everything by their own emotions, they may struggle to make decisions from a logical and fair standpoint. And because of the undeveloped nature of their thinking function, they may have a hard time trusting their rational mind, and this can show up as extremely negative, obsessive, or tyrannical thoughts about themselves and others. Now, a sensation person with an inferior intuitive function will have a hard time seeing past what's right in front of them, and they may fear the abstract and unknown. Thinking about the future and possibilities and potentials may be very hard for them, and they may feel disconnected from their inner world. And because of this, people with an inferior intuitive function may have very weird fantasies and obsessive behaviors. And now lastly, and in contrast to this, a person with inferior sensation has a tendency to live in fantasies and be very detached from their reality. They may get lost in future possibilities and what could be, rather than recognizing their situation for what it actually is. They may struggle to materialize their dreams and have a hard time connecting with their own body and senses, which can then lead to phobias and anxieties. Now, next to your introverted or extroverted function, you'll have one main function that guides your perception and judgments of the world. And you can also develop an auxiliary function which supports this. The others, however, will be felt as your weak spots. For example, I'm an introvert with feeling as my main function and intuition as my auxiliary function. So my extroverted thinking is my weak spot. What this means is that my strengths are in my mind's ability to see the possibilities and emotional value in things, but I tend to struggle with actualizing ideas and following a logical approach. So a big part of shadow work is in developing these inferior functions to be more balanced and integrate your shadow traits. How do you do this? You can use your MBTI type to create an alter ego that will help you develop your exact weak spots. I'm an INFP with introverted feeling and intuition as my dominant functions. So my weakness is in my extroverted thinking and sensation. And this is exactly where I tend to struggle and feel stuck and have problems show up. It's in all of these traits: organization, problem solving, spontaneity. Something I've definitely noticed is that whenever you feel stuck in life, when you feel stuck like this, it's a good sign that you're trying to use your inferior function, and this is why you may get frustrated and self-sabotage. So to balance this out, I'd create an alter ego with these complementary functions, and I'd use this as an alternate persona to orient myself by. And you can create the ideal alter ego for yourself by looking at your personality type. You can use the MBTI types for this, and then seeing what the opposite is. These are all the functions and qualities you need to develop to be more balanced in your conscious attitude. This is what's going to help you solve most of your problems in life, stop self-sabotaging, and have the qualities you need in order to reach your potential. So since talking about just functions is very abstract and not very helpful, I like to look at characters for this. There are so many websites where you can search characters based on different MBTI personalities, so try doing this for the opposite personality type, and then you can go through, see if you recognize any of the characters that show up, see if you like them. Obviously, you don't want to choose an unhealthy role model for this, so make sure that it is a character that you actually do admire. By using a character like this, it's much easier to tap into this different mindset and step out of your own thinking style. You can use this to almost supplement what you're missing and avoid the typical mistakes you tend to make. For example, I've always really loved the character Hermione from Harry Potter. I admired so much about her intellect, her confidence. She trusts in herself, she's incredibly hardworking and determined, and she's very organized and efficient in what she does. In shadow work, admiration or even jealousy is often a big indicator that these same qualities are within yourself and need to be developed to become your strengths or hidden talents. So whenever you notice yourself admiring qualities in another person, it's because it resonates with something within you, something you need to develop in order to have that for yourself. For years, especially in my school days, whenever I needed to deal with something that was difficult for me, I would try to become Hermione. I would try to think like her, act like her. I would just try to be her. And this is something that gave me so much strength, because even though I had my weaknesses, as Hermione, I could counter this. I could act self-assured, do what needs to get done, and ask myself, what's the smart thing to do in a situation? And this helped me so much because it wasn't how I would usually deal with problems or tough situations that came up. And funny enough, it wasn't until years later that I actually found out that her character is typed as an ESTJ, which is the exact opposite of my type. So of course these traits of hers stood out to me because they were exactly the things that I was lacking in myself. You want to choose a character, an alter ego that embodies these qualities, the exact qualities you're missing and you want to develop, you need to develop in yourself. So just the other day, I was trying to work on a problem and I was going about it in my usual way. I did a lot of journaling. I tried to listen to my feelings and intuition with this. I sought out solitude and quiet. I went for lots of walks. I even started making mood boards, hoping that maybe inspiration could solve this problem for me. But I kept getting stuck and I became really frustrated and I started trying to avoid this problem altogether. So eventually, I asked myself, what would Hermione do? I thought about it and I knew right away, oh, she would go about it like this. She'd probably look at the situation objectively, looking at the risks and benefits of each, evaluating her current skill. She'd focus on learning everything she could to work through this problem, and most importantly, she'd probably be very quick to make a decision and then constantly seek to improve. And after writing all of this down, I realized that this is exactly the solution to my problem, only I wasn't able to think of it myself. I find it fascinating how powerful and creative the mind can be, yet it gets caught in such a routine of thinking. And this is why having an alter ego can be so helpful. Whenever I feel stuck in a situation, whenever I feel like I'm struggling to work something out, I ask myself, what would Hermione do? And this usually is the solution and exactly what I need to do in order to deal with this problem. It's just not the way that I'm used to thinking, not as the image or persona I have for myself. Something I also find really interesting is how we can project our opposite types in a very unhealthy way. Right now, whatever your MBTI type is, I want you to look up the opposite type and read its description, because I bet you this is exactly who you become when you're at your worst, just a very immature and unhealthy version of it. For me, this would be the ESTJ type, and when I get overwhelmed or very stressed, I embody the worst of all of its traits, that I end up creating a lot of problems for myself, and it's because these qualities are undeveloped for me. They're inferior. If this sounds familiar, it's because this is exactly what a projection of your shadow looks like. Remember how all these psychological functions, they exist on a spectrum, and whenever it becomes more and more one-sided, it opens up the back door into your unconscious, into your shadow. Your ego will then reject or neglect any thoughts, feelings, or even fears that it isn't adept at dealing with, and this will fall into your shadow. Anything that falls prey to the unconscious can develop a very compulsive, tyrannical, and even obsessive quality. Think back to the inferior types. It's still a part of you, it just shows up in a very undeveloped and at times destructive way. So your shadow is most likely to show up in your psychological weak spots, in your inferior functions. For example, if you have a strong thinking and a weaker feeling function, you'll have a harder time processing and dealing with your own emotions. And as your conscious attitude is focused on the information and objective value of things, it will tend to suppress the emotional value, which it doesn't deem necessary. And since you haven't developed your feeling function, whenever uncomfortable feelings arise, you're going to reject them and push them away into your shadow where they're going to grow. The more this happens, the greater the charge of these repressed emotions, and if the same kind of fears and feelings get repressed again and again, they can even become so big that they form a shadow complex. You just need to know that your inferior functions, the opposite to your MBTI personality types, are like backdoors to your shadow. And this is where all your fears and thoughts and emotions can slip through, where they'll drive self-sabotaging behaviors and hold you back when you're trying to reach your goals. So the best way to develop your inferior functions is slowly and through a lot of practice, and having an alter ego can really help with this. It can help you embrace these qualities that you're missing and use them so that you can reach your fullest potential and no longer get in your own way because you're lacking the qualities you need in order to reach your aspirations. So, to sum all this up, your ego has a certain thinking style. This is your conscious attitude, and it shapes your individual strengths and weaknesses. And its inferior functions, your opposite functions, are where your shadow tends to develop. This is where problems show up. This is where you self-sabotage and why you feel stuck in life. So to fix this, to try and develop these weaker functions in yourself, you can use an alter ego, which plays into the complementary relationship between your ego and persona. Because this alter ego acts like a second persona that you can choose and be intentional about. I like to do this by choosing a character who has the opposite MBTI type as myself, because you can then use this to orient yourself when making decisions, and it will give you practice and experience in developing these qualities. It will help you think differently about things and really nurture these weaker functions in yourself. And over time, this new mask or alter ego will influence your conscious attitude, which will then in time reshape your persona. So I really hope I explained this well enough. Please let me know if you found this helpful, if you have any questions, or just share your thoughts with me on this. If you like this kind of stuff, I talk a lot more about shadow work and self-concept on my channel, so feel free to check it out. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week. Bye.